Hey, what's up? Hello, everybody. Welcome to Roll Pod, an Alabama sports podcast from Bama 247. I'm Cody Goodwin, back from Florida, where we watched a miserable, lousy, lackluster. I believe John Talty, senior writer from 247 Sports, who's here with me on today's show, called it a not good, very bad 17-3 win for Alabama over a South Florida team that is knee deep into a rebuild. John, I don't know exactly where we should start this reaction podcast. So, where do you think we should start when it comes to assessing Alabama's performance and what it means moving forward, knowing that the SEC schedule kicks off next week? Like, there's a lot that we could dive into here, and I'm not exactly sure where we should start, but there's a lot of fruit to pick from this tree from what we saw on Saturday.
Yeah, well, I mean, let's start with just the obvious right here that if Alabama plays the way that they did on Saturday against South Florida, moving forward in the SEC play, they're going to have multiple losses. I mean, that's just the reality of the situation, in my opinion. I mean, this is a team that had its hands full all game against a program that went 1-11 last year. That was a 33 or 34 point underdog based on the gambling book that you use. And I remember talking to their AD ahead of the game, and he kept saying how much of a tremendous honor it was to have Alabama come to Tampa. Like, it's almost like they were welcoming like a king, like it wasn't like, yeah, we think we're going to knock them off. It was just like, this is so great that we get to have Alabama play in our stadium, that our fans get to see like the legendary Alabama. And what their fans saw was not a very good version of this Alabama team. So I think moving forward, obviously we'll get into this a little bit, and then I'm sure in our podcast, later in the week, we'll get into even more this Ole Miss game and what it means and all of that. But it's kind of time to wake up, and if there's opportunities to make improvements and adjustments, like, it's got to happen fast. And if this is what this team is, then it's going to be a roller coaster ride, because that was one of the, not to be overly negative here, but that was probably one of the most lackluster performances that I can remember from an Alabama team, especially against what was clearly an overmatched opponent.
You mentioned the 30-plus point, that was the line that Alabama was favored by on the road against a team that, coming into this game, 5-30 in its last 35 games. They were 1-1 this season, had a win over FCS Florida A&M. You could argue because they forced 5 turnovers. They took a loss, pretty sizable loss to Western Kentucky to start the season. And Alabama really, there was an hour-long rain delay, whatever, had a quarterback change. Maybe that throws a wrench into things. But this was just a game that was just ugly. Like this, we were cracking jokes in the press box, Rodak and I, about how I thought I left Big Ten country behind. Like it was that rough, right? There were a couple of turnovers and miscues that ultimately led to, South Florida had a 3-0 lead. We were having to look up, when was the last time Alabama was shut out in the first half? Because, up until they kicked a field goal to tie it 3-3 at half, there was next to no hope for this offense. Like it didn't look good. It didn't feel good. Watching it was just a miserable experience. It was tough. It was really tough. They ultimately pulled it out, obviously 17-3. They're 2-1 now on the season. For the first time in, 6 years, they're out of the AP top 10. I think, one of the two major takeaways I took from this game and the instant reaction that I wrote was that one, didn't even look like a top 25 team, let alone one that is now ranked, I believe, 12th, 13th, somewhere in that ballpark. They're outside the top 10 now. But the other one was that, maybe this is where we start. The team that took the field, the Alabama team that took the field, that team ain't going to win a national championship this year. I think everybody was pleased with the week 1 win over Middle Tennessee because they came out and they curb stomped an inferior opponent. I think people, in hindsight, and maybe they start to see it a little bit now, but week 2 loss to Texas, a couple of costly mistakes. But Alabama was very much in the thick of that game, had a 16-13 lead going into the fourth quarter. I think people are going to look back on that Texas team when we get to the end of the season and say, wow, that was a very, very good Texas team. I'm not sure, are there plays that Alabama probably wants back from that game? Yes. But in the long run, I don't know that that's going to look like such a terrible loss, even though it was at home and it was by multiple possessions. That we didn't see that version of Alabama on Saturday. And the version we did see is not a team that's going to contend for an SEC championship. It's not a team that's going to contend for a national championship, which makes me wonder if that's the team we're going to continue to see. Is it time to adjust expectations? And if you do that, I think that allows you to see the game in a little bit of a different light. You and I were talking before we hit record here about, if we want to keep the championship expectations on them, is it time to hit the panic mode? And if we decide to take the championship lens off of this team, like you said, roller coaster, could be an up and down year. That's my spiel. What do you got from there?
Yeah, I mean, I think expectations are, that's one of the big challenges. And I think at Alabama under Nick Saban, the expectations are championship or bust every year, right? And so they last won one in 2020. They came awfully close to winning one in 2021. I think a lot of people expected them to win one in 2022, and they came up short. And so there was some pressure, I think, heading into this season to can they get back on top? Can they make the playoff? Can they prove that they are still the kings of college football? And we heard that from players too. They were upset about hearing the talk of them falling in stature. Georgia really kind of taken that crown. So if that's the expectations and that's the hope, you might be disappointed just based on what we've seen so far. I think it's going to be a really hard journey through this SEC schedule. I think they can still win most, if not all, of those games. Just again, the talent level is high enough that they should, if they maximize their potential. But there's enough of a resume at this point, I would say, to not take any of those games for granted. Certainly not Ole Miss coming into town. That's going to be, I think, a challenging game. And I just, I think that there are positives that you can take away from this game. It's not 100% negative. I think the defense is very good. I think that, the defense can probably keep them in some games. I think that Roy Dell played really well. I think it seems like he should probably be the guy moving forward at running back, just the way he was running so hard and just hitting the holes hard. I feel like Jace can dance around a little bit, and I feel like Rodell was really a revelation at the end of that game. And so, the quarterback position is always going to be a big question. Honestly, I mean, this is in part just based on, me, and, I'm not trying to do a crossover episode here, but, I'm a Jets fan, and having watched the Jets, against the Bills.
My condolences, by the way.
Yeah, but I see some similarities, like very good defense, some good running backs, offensive line, a question for sure. They can do some things, but they are going to give up big sacks otherwise. And just a big question about what your quarterback can do, and do you trust him? Because I think that's a big question right now, is that who is it going to be? And then do you trust him? And can you build, we were saying before we started, can you build an offense around that guy, whoever it's going to be? And I think what I liked, what I liked somewhat of what we saw Saturday is that I think there's more clarity as to what the path is with all of those different guys. I think you can see what it would look like with Ty and what you need to do. I think you can see clearly what it would be with Jalen and what you have to do there. And, I think to me, you saw enough from Tyler Buckner to say it's probably not him. Now, some of that was unfair, the weather and all that. But to me, I think Jalen and Ty are at clearly a level above Tyler at this point. So that's going to be a big question mark that they're going to have to figure out too. And, we could talk about quarterbacks all day, but that's, obviously it will be an important decision for Nick Saban and Tommy Rees to figure out and the build up to this Ole Miss game.
Yeah. And I think maybe we should start there. Just the quarterback discussion, what we saw on Saturday, what we think we'll probably see moving forward. I thought for the most part, watching it live on Saturday, that the quarterback play that we saw from Buckner, he got 5 drives, just 5 wholly fruitless, unproductive drives. Like, let's be real. And then Ty Simpson got the remaining 7 drives, and a little bit of a slow start, a little bit up and down, but I thought he did some pretty good things, right? He missed his first 4 passes. He hit on his next 5. He was the beneficiary of Boydell Williams, a sensational run game. He finished with 129 rushing yards and a touchdown. That's a career for him. Second time ever in his career that he's surpassed 100 rushing yards. So Ty Simpson was still able to do a lot of good things. I thought he also got sacked 5 times. That's another discussion that we'll get to on this show. But the quarterbacks, I thought for the most part, watching it live, pretty strong case that Jalen Milroe probably should be QB1 moving forward. That said, the idea that they need to make a decision so that they can commit the rest of the offense and commit the offensive identity to a guy. I think whether it's Milroe or Simpson, because I think Simpson's one of those guys. What made him so interesting was that over the last 2 years before Saturday, he had played a grand total of 38 snaps. Like, we just didn't know what it was. He got 40 snaps on Saturday, and I thought he got better with each one. Sacks happened. He had a good run game going. He really only threw 9 times, but he looked competent. He looked confident as he continued to go. He took some gnarly hits. You got to clean that up. But I think that the good news is if those are your two guys, 1A, 1B, or number 1, number 2, you can design an offense where I think both of them can thrive because they have similar skill sets. Jalen Milroe might be a lot faster, but Ty Simpson seems to be a guy that, like, he can make the throws you need him to. He's mobile. I hate to use the phrase deceptively fast, but like, the guy can tuck it and run a little bit if he needs to.
And I've been saying that for a while. I think he's an underrated athlete. I think we compare him to Jalen, which he's not, but to your point, I think he showed some things that he can get out there and move if he has to.
Yeah. So so then the question then becomes, okay, if they're similar enough that whatever the offense looks like moving forward needs to be tailored to their strengths, what does that look like? I think that means some maybe a little bit of RPO action. I think that means maybe some quarterback design runs just to keep the defense honest a little bit, because we've seen the last couple of weeks that, like, and even Saban said this is maybe another lingering offensive line issue, but defenses have seemed to have figured out when Alabama's going to run the ball, and they just run blitz, and it's just created issues. When the quarterback is part of the rushing attack, keeps them a little bit honest, right? So then that's able to open up the play action a little bit. We saw Ty Simpson hit CJ Dupre for a 45-yard gain right down the middle. We know Jalen Milroe's worked on his deep ball. It's maybe the strongest aspect of his passing game to this point in the season. Okay, so get the tight end involved, because, they weren't hardly involved at all yesterday outside of Dupre's couple of catches, a couple of targets. I know he had the one big one, but then Robbie Oots had a catch later along in that drive. Amari Niblack's a guy who's been he's been great when they involve him. He really wasn't involved all that much yesterday. And then obviously, they can run the ball well. Like, we saw it with Roydell. I know it was in the fourth quarter when the offensive line was finally overpowering a weaker team. But Chase McClellan's got multiple runs of 10+ yards this season, usually at the beginning of drives, but that's a guy who's capable. It seems like those are going to be the two running backs that are going to get most of the touches this year. But, I think whatever the offense looks like, I think now that they've seen through the first 3 weeks what each guy can do and, where the levels of confidence are in each guy, and maybe we'll learn more about that this week, but there's an offense to be crafted around these guys and their strengths. And the good news is their strengths are fairly similar. So whatever the offense looks like moving forward, I think both of those guys, whoever gets chosen as QB1 moving forward, should be able to thrive if they do it right, right?
Well, thrive's a strong word. I don't
Play
know.
well.
Play better, right?
Yeah.
I think that the questions, and you can dissect it a lot of different ways, but I think the questions that I have moving forward is not solely, and I think we put a lot of the blame or credit on quarterbacks, and Nick Saban's talked about this too. But I think there's clear questions about the play calling at this point. You were hitting on some of that there. And I was texting with some former players last night, and they're just kind of like, I just don't understand whether it's Texas game or South Florida game, why they're not doing more things, whether it's quick slants, just they're not doing more to get the guy in rhythm. It just feels like we're just trying to do the same thing over and over again, and it's not working. And I think that's a legitimate question. And then, I think the offensive line was not good. I think that's probably 2 games that they have not been good. I wonder what, I think missing Tower Booker obviously was a factor there. We'll see whether he's able to go against Ole Miss. I do wonder at some point, just based on what we've seen, whether there's a consideration about flipping Proctor and JC Latham. It just felt like Proctor can maybe get there one day, but it just feels like the game's too fast for him. And maybe he's a little too big. I mean, I think we kind of talked about this, I think after the Texas game, where I wondered, like, are these guys just a little too big that it's creating issues? And watching South Florida, I mean, that's kind of how I felt. I just felt like these guys are so big, but they're slow. And against these smaller edge rushers, they're having problems. So that's another thing that I think needs to be figured out. But it is kind of funny, though. Like, I feel like we've talked a lot on this show, and Nick Saban himself has compared this team to 2015 and the loss that they had to Ole Miss early in the game. And so it's interesting to me that A, they're playing Ole Miss this week, but B, the Tyler Buchner experience on Saturday felt very reminiscent to when Cooper Bateman started over Jake Coker, where they tried him out. It was like, nope, that didn't work. And then Coker was just the guy moving forward. And so I think sometimes the value is you learn what it's not going to be. And I think I've always been on the team that I think Simpson gives you the highest ceiling and Milroe gives you the highest floor. I still believe that based on what I've seen. I think that Simpson might be a little riskier than Jalen, but I think he's ultimately potentially a better passer, and I think you can do more there. But, you know, that offensive line that we saw against South Florida is what we're getting moving forward. You know, maybe give or take a little bit each game, sometimes a little better, sometimes a little worse. I'd feel a little worried about putting Ty back there just because Milroe can at least has an escape valve at times. Ty, I mean, teams are just going to lock in on him and just try to rock him the way he got rocked a couple times against South Florida. And unless Proctor takes a big step forward, that's going to be an ongoing issue. So there's just a lot of questions, I think, there. You know, when we come out of this non-conference slate, I think we know that this team isn't as good as we thought it was going to be at the start of the season, but I think there's still a lot of questions that we have. And the fact that we're entering into the first game of the SEC schedule, not knowing who the starting quarterback is going to be, I think is something that we talked a lot about over the offseason. Like, you really need to know who your starter is by Ole Miss. And that hasn't happened. And so that's a real question moving forward.
Yeah, I think there's a case for Jalen Milroe. You know, with him behind center, they put up 42 points against Middle Tennessee. They put up 24 against Texas. He's got a deep ball. He's got his own speed, his own foot speed. There's also the turnovers. I think there's a case for Ty Simpson. He got better against an inferior opponent as the game wore on a little bit. That was the most snaps he's gotten as a collegiate quarterback. You know, he got sacked 5 times. That's an offensive line issue. We'll get to there in just a second. You know, he missed his first 4 throws, but then he settled in and he was able to hit his next 5. He also has running capability. He also did not turn the ball over. I think that's something that's important, that neither Buchner nor Simpson, for as rough as the offensive performance was yesterday, no turnovers from the offense. Thumbs up.
I mean, and I think I saw some people joking about it on Twitter, but it is worth noting, as you are, that there are numerous times when Simpson was getting rocked that he could have fumbled that ball and coughed it up, and he didn't. And that's you know, that says something about him. And I think that there is something to be said too about taking the sack versus throwing the interception. And I think that that's something that, you know, you don't like seeing your guy get rocked like that, but I think that that's both of those guys showed better decision making, and I think that's going to be part of the calculus. The risk reward, right? Like, this guy's not as likely to make mistakes, but he gives me less of this, or this guy gives me more of this, but not that. And so I don't know. It's such a fascinating thing because you could talk yourself into different options, you know?
Yeah. Well, and speaking of talking into different options, I think the part of this puzzle of trying to figure out what the best version of this offense looks like, whether it's Milroe or Simpson, is trying to figure out what the hell's going on with this offensive line. This is, I'll be honest, I'm sick and tired about writing how bad these guys are. Like, because that's, you know, we wrote about how good they were supposed to be during the preseason, right? They wanted to be physically imposing. They wanted to be dominant. They wanted to make people quit. They wanted to win the Joe Moore Award. And all we've seen through the first 3 weeks is they've given up 12 total sacks. For the first time in the Nick Saban era, they've given up 5 sacks in back-to-back weeks. That's not good. They're on pace to give up 48 sacks in the regular season. That would be the most in a single season that they've allowed under Saban. That's not good.
No, it is
A lot
not.
of it, that's not good. A lot of it comes down, a lot of it is on Caden Proctor. He's not had a good couple of weeks. I think the Texas game could be excused because, again, that's a very, very good defensive front. This one, Buddy gave up at least 2 sacks. I haven't done the rewatch as we're recording this, but he gave up 2 sacks to Daquan Evans, who had himself a career day with 3 sacks. He had 3 of South Florida's 5 sacks. By the way, South Florida, 5 sacks against Alabama's offensive line. They had 4 total sacks coming into the season against Western Kentucky and Florida A&M. And then they get 5 on Alabama. I wrote a whole story about how this is a problem. Saban called it a consistent problem. But anyway, Daquan Evans, 5'11", 190 pounds, running in and out and in between and running circles around big bad Caden Proctor. Love the kid. Watched him develop into a 5-star prospect. I think he's going to be a good player. He is not playing good right now. Right. So here's a couple of thoughts. You could just make the switch, like you put Latham at left tackle so you can protect the blind side, put Proctor over at right tackle, see if that works. So if Booker comes back, do you put him back on the right side? That's one thing that Saban said maybe would have caused some issues yesterday because he discovered during the preseason, right, that putting Booker next to Proctor tends to help with Proctor's confidence a little bit because Book's there to kind of help him with the calls. Do you try Elijah Pritchett here? Because the thought there is that, love you, KP. I don't know that Pritchett could be much worse than what we've seen the last couple weeks. So give it a shot. If it works, Proctor could still be in line for a red shirt. And think of how useful 3 games, including one against a team that we think could probably make the playoff, could be useful when it comes to developing for the rest of the year. And you still have 4 quarters to play with if you want to sub him in and get him some time. But, do you try Pritchett? Do you push Latham over to the left side and plug Pritchett into the right side? The interior, I thought, has also been beat up quite a bit the last 2 weeks. I know against Texas, they've had to deal with Tavondre Sweat, who's, as Eli Gold referred him to as the Great Wall of China. He's that big. But they weren't that much better yesterday, just on first watch. I'll look again on the rewatch, but South Florida was doing a bunch of stunts and blitzes and different types of games and stuff, and it was confusing the interior of the line. So, Ferguson got to play in lieu of Booker. So, you could probably chalk up some of the interior offensive line struggles to Book not being there. But Ferguson got in there. He played admirably. I didn't see anything noticeable where I was like, wow, that's a bad play by Ferg. Do you sub him in for Dalcourt when Book comes back? I wonder if you play with that for a little bit. And I know Ole Miss is not the team that you want to play with offensive line pieces against because you want to win that game, right? You kind of need to win that game. But I think it's something they need to start considering because you can't be giving up 12 sacks every 3 games and expect to get to where you want to go. So part of tailoring the offense to whoever QB1 ends up being means you got to fix the offensive line or you got to call 60 plays a game where you're doing your best to basically protect both your quarterback and your offensive line. And that's a lot of rollouts. I don't think they're going to do that.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I think it's kind of chicken or egg, right? Is it do you pick your QB based on what your offensive line is, or do you adjust your offensive line based on who your QB is? I think there's different paths there based on the personnel. It's funny. I was watching that game last night. I came back to, if you've ever seen Jurassic Park, there's been so much made about how big this offensive line is and how their average weight and all that. And I thought back to, and I'm paraphrasing here, but the quote essentially they were so concerned about whether they could, not whether they should. And it just felt like there was this let's get beefy and big and we're going to overpower guys. And, I think Saban's you can win now by going more smash mouth and adjusting that way. And I think we're seeing a little bit now why a lot of other offensive lines are not this big and why they're not having a ton of 360-pound plus guys, because it creates issues. Like you said, you got little 5'11" guy dashing and darting right past you, and your footwork, you just can't move a body that big that fast. And so that, I think, is one of the questions. But I mean, if you look at the offensive line, and I'm not here to knock a bunch of college kids, but if you look at the offensive line, I think big picture wise, Latham has been pretty good this year. I haven't seen, a lot of glaring issues. I mean, he hasn't been perfect for sure, but not major glaring issues. I didn't see anything on first watch from Ferguson that was a red flag to me. It felt like he did okay. But Proctor has had obvious issues, and it's not just getting blown up. It's like multiple penalties and bad times. Dalcourt has had those exact same issues. And Seth McLaughlin, I mean, I just expected so much more out of him. And I don't think he's been good all year. And there's been some kind of scuttlebutt that he might not be 100% health-wise, and maybe that would explain some things that are happening with that group. But, I mean, when a school like South Florida feels like they can just tee off on you all day, like, that's scary. That's scary compared to what you're going to see. I mean, A&M has some 5-star, guys that they're going to roll out there. If you somehow make it, I mean, LSU has, I know a lot of people were upset about how LSU used Harold Perkins against Florida State, but, I have a sense that Brian Kelly will figure out a way to use Perkins to torment whoever Alabama's quarterback is at that point. And then
I imagine Pete Golding was probably watching that game yesterday with great interest about, if that's what South Florida's doing, like, why can't we do that with better athletes at Ole Miss, right? No offense to South Florida, but that's what they're dealing with.
Yeah, and that's, I think, what you're going to see, and this is, I think, one of the other ongoing challenges is that, there's lots of smart people in college football, and I think, to me, there was a bit of a playbook clearly being built, a blueprint that Texas clearly showed some things on tape against Alabama that it seems like South Florida picked up on. And, because I can remember, Saban talking after the Texas game, just some of the things that they did that, I think caused problems. As you mentioned, South Florida, a lot more stunts and different things. If I'm Pete Golding, and Pete Golding, for all his flaws that Alabama fans felt that he had, is a very smart defensive mind. He's going to see that, like you said, and be, oh man, I can dial up some stuff here. And then Mississippi State, looked very not great against LSU. Let's put it nicely, but defensive minded head coach Zach Arnett, he's going to figure out some things. You got, Texas A&M with DJ Dirk. I mean, there's just enough smart defensive minds in the SEC that are going to see what's happening, and that's going to be on the Alabama coaching staff to either change the personnel, change the strategy, or just hope that you can coach them up and develop them between now and the end of the season. If you feel like option 3 is your best option, I would be a little worried right now.
Yeah. When you put consistent behavior on tape, the smartest coaches in the world are going to spam it until you stop it. And it's 2 weeks. So it's not, 1 is an accident, 2 is a trend, 3 is evidence. I don't know that Ole Miss is going to be the team that they're going to solve it against. So it makes you wonder what they're going to do, if they're going to do anything ahead of Ole Miss. Again, one of those pieces to the puzzle that is trying to figure out what this offense looks like, or what the best version of the offense looks like. Because, we asked Saban last week, the challenges of trying to create an offensive identity. They clearly just, back-to-back weeks, they just don't know. Last week, I guess, against Texas, it was home run or strikeout ball. This week, I have no earthly idea what they were trying to accomplish, or if South Florida was just, they had a good enough game plan that, whatever they tried to accomplish, South Florida blew it up, right? So final stat on the offensive, keep going.
No, I was just going to make a quick point. And he's bounced around some, but, South Florida's defensive coordinator, Todd Orlando, and that's a guy who was previously defensive coordinator at Texas, I think at USC. So, he's obviously gotten fired and he's had to move around, but that's a guy who does have a major, major football pedigree. So he's not, I'm sure he is a very smart guy as well, and was able to figure out some things and was able to, at a minimum, maximize the talent they had to give Alabama, all that it could handle.
Yeah. Like you said, lots of smart people in and around college football. One final stat I didn't want to throw out: in addition to the sacks, Alabama's offensive line has allowed 54 pressures to opposing defenses through the first 3 weeks, per our friends at Pro Football Focus. That's a lot. So 10 to Middle Tennessee, 25 to Texas, and then 19 to South Florida. Not the way you want to live. Not the way you want to live. That's kind of, up and down on the offense. The defense, I thought, and you hit on this at the beginning, it's all, I hate to make the comparison, and I know I said I left Big Ten football behind, but I feel like I'm dealing with Iowa again, an anemic offense, or at least an offense with too many questions, but the defense is very good. The defense was the reason that, South Florida was held to 3 points. Obviously, they played very, very well. against a quarterback that could run the ball. I mean, South Florida ended up running for 170 some rushing yards, and a lot of that was off QB scrambles that, you ask the guys, that's kind of hard to deal with no matter who the quarterback is. But, the defense, 7 points to Middle Tennessee, kept them very much in that game against Texas until Sark figured out, which matchups he wanted to exploit and then hit the spam button in the fourth quarter. Defense, I thought, did really well. This was an opportunity, I think, for the pass rush to finally, get right. Like I kind of phrased this as a get right game. They didn't necessarily get all the way right, but they did a lot of good things in this game. 35 total pressures, finished with 10 tackles for loss, 5 sacks. Dallas Turner had 2.5 sacks. They were able to get after an inferior opponent, and the pass rush did their job. I thought the secondary played fairly well. I thought they communicated fairly well on, South Florida runs Tennessee's offense, right? So they used that motion offense, a lot of pre-snap movement, not necessarily the same athletes that a Texas or, Tennessee last season had, but it looked like Alabama was able to handle it fairly well, even with all the rain. Which is encouraging because you hope that can then translate to when they play, an Ole Miss or when they play Tennessee down the line. Now that they know that they can do it, right? Like it's in their head. Like how can they, make sure that the fourth quarter against Texas doesn't happen again? I thought the defense played great. Like I thought they were fine. I thought they were good.
The only nitpick that I can think of was it felt like they might have struggled to contain the quarterback a bit. I'd have to pull up the exact stats, but, it felt like their quarterback was able to do some things where it felt like, just sensing maybe what they had in coverage. But yeah, overall, I mean, I think that this is the strength of the team. I think that there's lots of good individual talent. I think their linebackers are really strong. They didn't have Jaheim Otis, who, we kind of thought might be their best defensive lineman before the season. And I didn't feel like there was a major drop in play from the defensive line, which I think it speaks to, Tim Smith and other guys stepping up and just the way they use Dallas Turner, like you said. So I think that's encouraging. That's the thing that if I'm an Alabama fan I think if I'm an Alabama fan, the things that I am most excited about, I think the defense is really good and has potential to keep us in games all year. And I feel like Roydell was a revelation. And if this is more than just a one-time thing, let's ride this guy for a little bit. And again, I'm not saying they're the same person or anything like that, but if we want to keep going back to 2015 blueprint, they figured out after the Ole Miss game and as time went on that they had an incredible running back in Derrick Henry, who they had not been feeding the ball that much before that, and then they rode him all the way down. I don't think that Roydell is Derrick Henry. Don't take me out of context here, but I think that's a blueprint. I think that's a potential option for them if they can kind of keep that going. I think that would be encouraging to me. I think that we learn something new about this team every game. And I think that this upcoming game, excuse me. It's maybe we can edit that one out, Cody, my disgusting sneeze. But what I was saying was, I think that this is, I think we learned a lot about Texas. I think we learned a lot in South Florida, but this is something that I think this Ole Miss game will tell us even more, because I would hope by the end of the Ole Miss game, we have a much better sense who the quarterback is moving forward. We have a much better sense as to whether they're able to make any adjustments with the offensive line. And we'll be able to see after, having some hiccups against Texas, but I didn't think they played poorly, but some hiccups for sure, how they handle a Lane Kiffin offense in which he is, I think, one of, if not the best play callers in college football. It's what he lives for. He's like, somebody who once compared it to me, it's like he just wants to play Madden all day. Like he just wants to dial up exotic play calls to use against Nick Saban. So he's going to bring it on Saturday, and I'm excited to see what they're able to do to try to stop that. So, I think when we have this conversation a week from now, you're either going to be like, you know what, South Florida was a blip. Things are on the way up. They found a way to beat Lane Kiffin. They played great. Jalen Ortai is the guy moving forward. This team still has a real shot. Or if they lose to Ole Miss, people are going to be just slamming the panic button, and it's going to be, is this a 4 or 5 loss team? It's going to be a very, very different conversation depending on what happens against Ole Miss. So stay tuned for that, right?
Yeah. How close are you to the panic button?
I'm hovering. I think we're a couple minutes closer to midnight, right? Is that like the doomsday clock? We're a little bit closer there. Yeah, I mean the South Florida, like the Texas one, I could kind of write off. I mean, I think we all were disappointed by how that played out, and I think there were some big picture takeaways that myself and others had. South Florida to me is more concerning for a number of reasons, and I don't want to belabor the point here too much, but I think that you and I were saying this before the podcast, like the challenge is that we're always going to compare a current team to what we've seen in the past, especially at Alabama. So the standard is always, here's how Nick Saban has previously handled things. Here's how his teams have previously handled things, all that kind of stuff. And losses have been so rare at Alabama that when they do happen, what you expect is a team to come out looking to kick butt the next game. And I remember doing a story about this about a year ago. Mississippi State has been on the receiving end of numerous of those kind of post-Alabama loss butt kickings where they just come in and they're like, we're sending a message to the entire world. We're not dead, and we're going to make you feel what we're about to do. Obviously, we didn't see that against South Florida. And that felt like such a game where you do remind the world that you're not dead, and you blow them out and you make everybody scared. Uh-oh, we woke up big bad Alabama. I don't think that's what people are saying at all. I think people are like, oh, this Alabama team is vulnerable. So that's why I am more concerned right now, just because, and I haven't been here for the whole run, but for the long part that I have been, you just don't see Nick Saban-led teams have duds like that against a group of 5 type opponent. So there's just a lot of weird stuff there that could make you concerned. And really, I think the thing that would make you feel most optimistic, I don't know that we've seen that much of. Like, I love our coworkers, and I think the way that they evaluate recruits is the best in the business. And so, I will always keep coming back to the fact that they are number 1 in the talent composite. They, over the last 4 or 5 years, have compiled the most talent on paper. And that is the reason I keep coming back to having optimism about this team. But at no point this season have I ever felt like what I've seen on the field is the number 1 most talented team in the country.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with that. I think that, if you really want to take the optimistic view of this, I still think the best version of the offense specifically is still out there. I think the defense is good. I think the defense is fine. I think the defense is going to continue to get better, and the defense is going to be, worst case scenario, if they lose 4 or 5 games this year, it's not going to be the defense's fault. So like, if you really want to take the optimistic view, the best that this offense can still play, like, I don't know that we've sniffed it yet.
I agree.
That said, with SEC play coming up, like, we need to start seeing it, right? And we all have different ideas just based on personnel, and maybe there are things we're missing, right? If we were smarter football minds, we probably wouldn't be working here. But that's, I don't know. Like, I've got ideas in my head. I know Saban has been very explicit about what he's wanted to see, and just based on that expectation alone, right? Like, running it more often than not, setting up the play action, dropping back and throwing it when you need to. Like, we just haven't seen that, even that version yet, I think, on a consistent basis. And so I think that's the most optimistic view. If we start seeing that against Ole Miss, and maybe they got to win a couple rock fights before the offense finally figures itself out, very similar to 2015, even though they were putting up points even in that lost Ole Miss. There is that version out there where they maybe slog through the first couple of SEC games before they figure it out, and then they take off. But, like we mentioned on the last pod, that loss to Texas, like, that's the margin for error is not there. So, like, you can't have the slip up against Ole Miss.
Yeah. And I agree. I mean, I think we even might've said it before the season started. Like, I did not expect a team to come out just absolutely dominating, like, some incredible offense. I think we always thought this team was going to probably have some hiccups along the way. It's just that they've been a little worse, I think, than we expected. But yeah, I mean, there's plenty of reasons to feel optimistic, like you just said. And I think it's, the number 1 takeaway from South Florida is they survived, right? And so it's just kind of like the old March Madness, survive and advance. Like, that's all that you have to do. Like, just keep finding a way to win and hope that you're learning a little bit more and more about yourself, so that if you are able to make it toward the end of the season and having a shot to be in the SEC championship, that you're in a much better place then, because there's just if you're glass half full, right? There's so much room for growth. They have not hit their ceiling yet, so there's a lot of opportunity to be better, and that's the reason to feel like this team could still be competitive.
I left Raymond James Stadium on Saturday wanting to speak to a manager because I thought when I was coming down here to cover SEC football that I would leave the rock fights in Middle America. But after do what?
You were swindled.
Maybe it's me. I don't know. Like maybe I brought it down here and life is no longer good because it's me. What's that Taylor Swift song? It's me. Hi, I'm the problem. It's me.
Yeah, you're the Alabama anti-hero, Cody.
You got to fill that blank space with something else. Yeah, but hey, like you mentioned, it could be a roller coaster, hot and cold ride the rest of the way. And while Alabama entered this season, as they do every year, with national championship aspirations, if that's not ultimately what happens this season, I think ultimately it could be an entertaining season all the same. And I know that that's not what people probably want to hear because that's probably going to mean a couple of losses that they weren't ready for. But, from our perspective, it can be kind of fun. I don't know. Like there's a lot of different ways we can look at this. We're only 3 weeks in. It's been a very entertaining first 3 weeks. But obviously we're probably going to adjust the lens and focus on how we kind of view this team and what the expectations are, probably week to week. That's really, John, I think we kind of hit on everything. Is there anything else you wanted to get to or any final thoughts before we sign off here?
No, I think it's a good spot to leave it at. So we'll have a lot more from Nick Saban all week. Bam, 24/7. We'll break down the game later on in the week. So lots more to come. Big week. It's a really big, it was going to be a big week even, without all of this. But I think the stakes of this game have certainly been raised just based on what we've seen and how important a win against Ole Miss is going to be.
Yeah. It'll be interesting. It'll be, interesting from the Alabama angle. And then obviously the Ole Miss angle with Lane Kiffin and Pete Golding on the other side. Going to make things all the more interesting. Like John said, be sure to subscribe to Bama 247 and 247 Sports. Guys, I said this on the last show. I'm going to say it again here. You can get a subscription for $1 a month to start, then just $10 a month thereafter for the best coverage of your favorite college football team. Take advantage of that, especially if you're an Alabama fan. In the meantime, before we come back later this week, be sure to rate and review this show wherever you listen to your podcast, Apple, Spotify, even our Bama 247 YouTube page. Be sure to go like and subscribe there if you haven't already. John, I appreciate you jumping on with me kind of a day later because of the travel. We'll get this up on Monday, even though we're recording it on a Sunday. But that is all we've got today, guys, in the spirit of our Taylor Swift themed ending here. Maybe we'll see Alabama shake this off, get rid of some of that bad blood, and write a love story against Ole Miss on the field this coming Saturday. Was that too cheesy? It might have been, but that's all we got today for this episode, guys. Appreciate y'all listening. We will talk again soon.